Please welcome to the stage White House Domestic Policy Advisor Neera Tanden.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? How was lunch? Excellent, excellent. As just announced, I'm Neera Tanden. I'm the President's Domestic Policy Advisor, and I have the profound honor to co-chair the White House Council on Native American Affairs. I co-chair that with Secretary Holland, who is a phenomenal leader. Let's give her a round of applause, shall we? And through that work, I've had the privilege to witness firsthand the transformative power of this administration's partnership, and I really want to emphasize partnership with tribal nations. We're incredibly grateful for all the work we've done together to strengthen the nation-to-nation relationship, a central priority for this president, for this administration, for this vice president. And really at the heart of our work is the notion of respect. The president will talk a little bit more about this this afternoon, but I just want to say that when he took office, he made a simple promise to honor the solemn trust and treaty responsibilities of the United States, and that those treaty responsibilities with tribal nations. He declared the administration's unwavering commitment to tribal sovereignty, self-determination, and self-governance, not just in words, but through transformative actions. And I'm really proud of the executive order we announced last year, Executive Order 14112, which was designed to breathe life into those words. It was designed to meet the unmet needs we've seen in the past, but truly put respect in the relationship by ensuring that our agencies, our programs, put tribal nations in the driver's seat. And I've been proud to work with tribes all across the country as they work with agencies, pressure agencies, push agencies to fundamentally live the words of Section EO 14112. Because we know that when tribal nations are in charge, when they have fewer bureaucratic hurdles, when they're able to implement programs with fewer strings, they understand, you as leaders understand the needs of your people best. And that is the fundamental principle behind Executive Order 14112. And I'm pleased that we have transformed many of the projects of the federal government, but it will take your leadership, your continued leadership, to ensure that every corner of the federal government is addressing these concerns. And I also just want to say that in my tenure as chair of the Domestic Policy Council, I have had the great privilege to travel the country, and I've made several visits to tribes that are focused on native languages. And I am pleased to have been part of the White House team that worked on the president's federal boarding school policy, and was pleased to be part of the announcement of his apology. And as he said at that event, that the truth must be told and the truth must be heard. I think the president will talk a little bit more about this, but one of the real tragedies of the Indian boarding school era, the federal Indian boarding school era, was the eradication, the deliberate eradication of the culture of our tribes, and really making it impossible for children to know who they were and where they come from. Over the last hundreds of years, there have been over 300 native languages that have flourished across the country. Today, only 190 remain, and according to experts, only 20 will remain by 2050 without concerted action. I visited a tribe, the Pueblo tribe. We're in Santa Clara, and I learned that native language revitalization, I learned of real strategies there. I was really lucky to visit a school, Carpo Community School, where they were really ensuring children were immersed in the Tewa language. So from kindergarten through sixth grade, students were learning both in English and Tewa. And I saw the bridge that led to their understanding of their culture from learning that language. And that's why I'm so proud of the work this administration is doing to ensure that we don't lose native languages going forward. The president will talk more about this in the afternoon, but we see this as the federal government's role in righting the wrongs of our past. That the federal government took actions to really not just traumatize, but ensure that native cultures were eradicated. And it is our role and responsibility to ensure that we build back that culture, that we provide education, that we have a full spectrum, a full strategy to ensure that we never again take these kinds of actions. So I'm really proud to be part of an administration that is not just investing in Native communities and ensuring that Native communities are getting the level of support and autonomy they need to deliver, but I'm proud of being of an administration that is not scared to right the wrongs of the past, to acknowledge our true history, because it is our actual history, and to correct those wrongs that need to be corrected for justice to prevail. Thank you all very much.
Please welcome to the stage Director of the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, Tom Perez.
Good afternoon, everyone. Oh my goodness, it's such an honor to be here around so many friends. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm Tom Perez, and I have the privilege of serving as the head of our Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. In that capacity, I work for Rose Petoskey, okay? And I want to give it up for all the wonderful people. There's Rose, there's Morgan Rodman, who works with NERA. There's Rudy Soto over at USDA. There's Brian Newland, our incredible Assistant Secretary. And of course, there you are, Brian. Thank you so much for what you do. And of course, nuestro héroe, Secretary Holland, thank you for being you. I want to quickly, there's one person, if I could take the liberty of seeing if he is here and if he could stand up, because he is truly one of my heroes, and that is Oren Lyons. Oren, are you here today? I was told you were. And if you are, could you stand? There he is, Oren in the back. Oren Lyons and I are going to go to Los Angeles in 2028, when you will be with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy carrying the flag for the Summer Olympics in lacrosse. Thank you, Oren, for what you do day in and day out. You know, moments like today, I can't help but be wistful, and I reflect on where we were, where we've come, and where we still need to go. You know, back in the 90s when I had hair and no replacement parts, I worked at the Justice Department. I remember 1995. That was a seminal year because that's when we established the Office of Tribal Justice at the Department of Justice. 2010, that office was made permanent as a result of an act of Congress that you all were so involved in. And 2009 is when we passed a hate crimes bill. And when I led the Civil Rights Division, we brought our first case under that bill, and which enabled us to vindicate the rights of a member of the Navajo Nation who was savagely beaten because he was Native American. We've made real progress, folks. And now we think about 2010 as well. That was the year of our first Tribal Nation Summit in St. Paul. And I remember the former Attorney General Eric Holder attending that. And every year, it's about making sure we're doing more making sure we're doing better, making sure we're doing everything in partnership. And now I look at what we've been able to do over the last 4 years. Nira and I were just with President Biden. He is so excited to be coming here soon so that we can again celebrate the remarkable partnership. There is no president or vice president that has done more for Indian country than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And we are proud of that. We're proud of that partnership, and we're going to keep it up. And I'm so appreciative of all the visits I had the privilege of taking, whether it was to the Osage Nation in Oklahoma, whether it was to so many tribal leaders in Arizona. And for me, the one that will always be most memorable was, again, the trip this past October with so many of you to, again, as Nira pointed out, to make the apology that was only about 100 years overdue. And the president will again talk about that more today. But what I think we need to focus on now, focusing on the future. You have set this, the last 4 years, we have set a high bar together. And this should be the floor, not the ceiling of what you demand moving forward. The partnerships that we have built are partnerships that should be and will be enduring because of all of the work that you have done and all of the foundation that Secretary Haaland, President Biden, Vice President Harris, and so many dedicated career and non-career professionals who are working throughout government. This is a moment of remarkable progress. But let's make sure that this moment is the floor and not the ceiling. The most important dependent clause in the English language is we the people in order to form a more perfect union. Our union, as you know better than just about everyone, was imperfect at its inception. We have made progress in the last 4 years, but we all know that more work lies ahead. Let's continue to do that work. Let's continue to do it in earnest. Let's take advantage of the foundations that have been laid here. And vamos a trabajar juntos. Working together, we will continue this progress. Thank you so much. The President and the Vice President look forward to speaking to you very shortly. Have a wonderful day.
Please remain in your seats. We will take a short break as we change the stage. Please welcome Sophia Madrigal.
Miahue, Achima, Buju, hello. My relatives, elders, and tribal leaders. My name is Sophia Madrigal, and I'm an enrolled member of the Cahuilla Band of Indians and am of Turtle Mountain Chippewa descent. Through my father's work, revitalizing the Cahuilla bird songs, I inherited a respect for our traditions and stories, but also an understanding of the responsibility that comes with them. Currently, I am a junior at Harvard University and serve as a California Native Youth Gen I ambassador. Standing before you today, I am filled with gratitude, as my ability to be here today is because of the work of so many of you, who I someday hope to embody. As an Indigenous girl, I know all too well that Indigenous women experience violence at rates 10 times higher than the national average. And since the age of 14, I have performed in the original Cahuilla play, Menyel in Her Heart, written by my sister, which addresses the devastating epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people. Since our first performance, where over 100 people crammed into a gathering hall to watch us perform, Menyel in Her Heart has been performed up and down the state of California over 14 times, including for the California State Capitol in 2022, where we performed for members of the legislature in an event that accumulated in $12 million of program funding to address the issue. Every time I perform, I am reminded of those who did not get to grow old. And it is for my friends back home who shared the same dreams as me growing up, but who will not get to live them. This past summer, I worked in Assemblymember James Ramos's office, where Ramos was instrumental in passing the Luke Madrigal Act, AB 2018, named in honor of my father and his work, which aimed to protect Native youth in foster care system who are most susceptible to this crisis of MMIP. Now I have the honor of introducing Vice President Kamala Harris. Throughout her career, Vice President Harris has always been a dedicated advocate for the Indian Child Welfare Act. When she was Attorney General of California, she created the Bureau of Children's Justice, which worked on ICWA cases, work she has continued during her time as Vice President. Over her career, Vice President Harris has shown a dedication to protecting Native families for generations to come, and who has pledged a strong commitment to uplifting our nation's trust and treaty responsibilities to tribal nations, work that advances our self-determination and sovereignty. So it is my profound honor to introduce Vice President Kamala Harris.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Can we please applaud Sophia? This is why we know the future is bright, right? Please have a seat. Please have a seat. Well, I want to thank everyone for your leadership, for your long-standing friendship, and for the work we have yet to do together. Let me say it is so good to be with Secretary Deb Haaland, who has been an incredible leader, as we know, and such a powerful fighter, and a dear friend and colleague to me. So I thank you, Deb, for all that you do. And to all the leaders who are here today, including all the leaders from California who I've worked with over the years on so many important issues, from protecting the rights of Native children to fighting for the safety of Indigenous women to conserving Native land. And I believe, of course, that the bonds between our nations are sacred. They are sacred. And that the federal government has a duty to safeguard and strengthen those bonds. A duty to honor tribal sovereignty, to ensure tribal self-determination, and to uphold our trust and treaty obligations. And I will always fight to build a future of opportunity and dignity for all Native people and all Native communities. As Vice President, I have had the honor to meet and work with thousands of Native leaders, from young leaders at our extraordinary tribal colleges and universities, to advocates fighting to protect Native votes and voting rights, to union workers in Arizona and Native small business owners from across the country. And here's what I know to be true. Native communities are home to some of the most innovative, skilled, and determined people in America. And as we all know well, there is an extraordinary amount of ambition, aspiration, and ability across Indian country. However, what is often lacking is the opportunity to pursue that ambition, aspiration, and ability. For far too long, the federal government has underinvested in Native communities, underinvested in Native entrepreneurs and small businesses, and underinvested in Native hospitals, schools, and infrastructure, which is why, over the past 4 years, we have made it a central priority, and it will remain a central priority to address these historic inequities and to create opportunity in every Native community. Take, for example, our work with Native small business owners. We know that one of the biggest hurdles to Native entrepreneurs is having access to capital. It's one of the biggest challenges. It's not for lack of a good idea, for serious work ethic, for a plan that actually would benefit the community and meet a demand, but it's access to capital. On tribal land and in many rural areas, the nearest bank is sometimes more than 100 miles away, making it more difficult for folks to get the resources and support that they need to start and grow a small business, which is why I have worked to expand access to capital since I served in the United States Senate, and as Vice President have made sure we invested over $1 billion in Native community banks, banks run by people who live in the community and understand and are in the best position then to understand the needs of the community, the capacity of the community, in a way that in particular other banks may not. And the impact of that approach is profound. As just one example, soon after taking office, I spoke with Anna LeBeau, a member of the Omaha tribe, and we had an extensive conversation. I reached out to her, and she understood that basically as an executive director of a Native community bank in South Dakota, that the entrepreneurs in the community, many of them just were not being recognized by those who could invest in their work and in their growth. We talked, for example, about entrepreneurs in the community who make traditional quilts and the challenges that they often face in securing loans, as big banks often don't fully understand the culture and therefore don't understand the value of the product or service, don't understand the demand, don't understand the need, just don't understand the culture. But community banks do. And today, Native community banks are using the $1 billion that we have given them to support Native entrepreneurs, to create jobs, and to generate economic opportunity across Indian country. In Native communities, we have also addressed inequities in healthcare, which we know is a long-standing issue. And we have done it with a belief, and I strongly believe, access to health care should be a right. and not just a privilege of those who can afford it. That this is a matter and that this is a matter simply about dignity, about allowing people to have a quality of life to which they are entitled, and in particular, to live without needlessly suffering. Nearly 3 million people rely on the Indian Health Service for medical care. In some communities, IHS hospitals and clinics are the only place that folks receive medical care. But before we took office, if Congress failed to pass a spending bill and the federal government then shut down, the IHS would stop receiving funding immediately. Many of you here know that. And when I was in the Senate, you called me to make sure I was clear about that. And hospitals, because what we know, hospitals and clinics across Indian country would then have to close their doors. I worked on this issue then, thanks to a lot of the leaders here, when I was a United States Senator. And I know the profound harm that these closures cause. In 2018, the federal government, many here remember that, the federal government shut down for more than a month. And I still remember the stories. A mother of 2 who was forced to wait for days for treatment for bronchitis, all the time terrified that one of her lungs would collapse. A 68-year-old grandmother who was forced to delay eye surgery despite daily pain. And a young man who was engaged to be married, who lost his life because the opioid treatment center he relied on in his community was shut down. These are just some of the stories, and they are heartbreaking. So when I was elected vice president, I was determined to finally deal with this issue and this injustice, and I am proud to report that for the first time ever, we made it so that IHS will now continue to receive funding even if the federal government shuts down. Which, of course, means that no matter what happens, people will continue to get the care that they need and deserve. It's just a matter of dignity and what is right. And to improve health care across Indian country, we have also taken on the issue, and again, there are so many leaders here who have been doing this work, to take on the issue of maternal health. Women in America die at a higher rate in connection with childbirth than women in any other so-called wealthy country in the world. And the latest numbers tell us it was twice as likely. The current numbers are that Native women are 3 times more likely than others to die in connection with childbirth. 3 years ago, this very month, as vice president, I challenged every state in our country to address this crisis. And in particular, I challenged them to extend postpartum coverage under Medicaid from a measly, what they were doing, 2 months to 1 year. I am proud to report that whereas when I issued the challenge, and I was pretty shameless about it, I really challenged them, right? Like I was in their face about it. When I first did it, only 3 states had Medicaid coverage postpartum beyond 2 months. As of today, 46 states offer a full year of postpartum coverage, right? And there are so many leaders in this room that are behind that work, and I thank you. So, and by the way, those stats tell us that it includes, of those 46 states, every one of the 10 states with the largest Native populations. And so, of course, the leaders here know what this means. It means that now there are thousands more Native women who have access to a full year of care, from vaccinations to checkups to postpartum depression screenings. It makes a difference. And all of this to know what we, again, must always do fight for the dignity of all people. To create a future of opportunity and dignity, we must also make sure every person has the freedom to drink clean water and breathe clean air. Tribal nations and people have served as responsible stewards of our environment and natural resources for millennia. The original leaders. And over the past 4 years, we have then made it a priority to make sure you have the resources to continue your important work of leadership. As just one example, last year I visited the Gila River Indian community in Arizona. And I was, by the way, the first, well, there was never a president to do it. I'm the first vice president to ever do it in history. And at Gila River, Governor Stephen Lewis, is he here? I thought that was you. Hi. Governor, it's good to see you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's good to see you. And we had such a wonderful visit, and the governor and I toured the site of a new clean water pipeline, and for those who haven't seen it, it's really a sight to see. It's really a sight to see. The project was proposed by Native leaders and created jobs for Native workers, and the project will reduce the impact of drought and provide a new source of water that Native farmers can now use to irrigate their fields. The Gila River project is just one of the thousands that will be supported and backed up by our investment of nearly $2 billion in Native-led climate projects to help clean up pollution and build reliable, clean energy and adapt to extreme weather, all of which will help protect Native communities for this generation and for 7 generations to come. So I will end with this. A few minutes ago, I had the privilege to meet with a group of extraordinary young Native leaders. Where are you guys? I know you came in here. Stand up, please. Just, you have to stand up. Come on. And we had such a wonderful visit. I could have just hung out with you guys all afternoon, to be honest. I'm telling you, our future is so bright. And I said to these leaders a few things. I mean, you know, this is just, I guess, for all of us culturally, we lecture. I lectured them. I told them what to do. I gave them advice they didn't ask for. And one of the things I said to them is that your leadership and your voice is so important, and we are so proud of you. And I said to them something everyone here knows. You know, you may many times, you will many times, be the only one that looks like you in a room. Be it a boardroom, a lecture hall, a meeting room, a congressional hearing. You may be the only one that looks like you in that room. But you always remember you are not in that room alone, that we are all in that room with you. And that when you walk in that room, we expect and demand that you will walk in that room chin up, shoulders back, carrying the voices of all of us who are so proud that you are there and are counting on you to lead. And I see in our young leaders such incredible potential. I see purpose. I see determination. I see ambition, which I applaud and must always be applauded. And here's one of the things I love most about our young leaders. They are rightly impatient. They are not waiting for someone else to lead. They are prepared to lead. And so I say, in the midst of challenges, in the midst of what might sometimes be a profound sense of uncertainty, let us always continue to have faith in our young leaders, in their future, and in our collective future. And I thank you all the leaders here, for all you have done and all you will do, and let us continue to fight for the opportunity and the dignity of all people. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
Our seats. The program will resume momentarily.
Please remain in your seats. The program will continue momentarily. Please welcome to the stage our panel on strengthening the nation-to-nation relationship.
Hello, hello. Not a hot mic.
All right. Good afternoon. Skoden. All right. Hani Buju, my name is Brian Newland, and for the last 4 years, I've had the honor and the privilege of serving as the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs. And I could not, thank you. I could not be more proud to serve under President Biden and Vice President Harris and Secretary Holland, tireless leaders who've worked to support tribal sovereignty, give decision-making authority back to tribes, and strengthen our nation-to-nation relationships between tribes and the federal government. And they've worked so hard, and they've worked us so hard that I didn't need glasses, and now I need glasses to do this stuff. We've really worked to put our money where our mouth is, with historic levels of investment, but more importantly, we've worked to make sure that the changes that we've made are lasting, and that we have the capacity to live up, in the federal government, to live up to our treaty and trust responsibilities. And I know the Vice President just departed the stage, but I want to give her a shout out too for her work on advancing the Workforce Development Program under Public Law 477. Without her leadership and commitment, we would not have this new interagency agreement and so many more 477 plans that provide tribes with flexibility to manage your federal funds. The Vice President led that. And today, in that vein, I'm excited to announce that we have completed our work on the Progress Act regulations on time to advance the work of self-governance, and those regulations will be appearing as final in the Federal Register any minute now. So, yes. Also, point of privilege, our Deputy Assistant Secretary, Catherine Isom-Claus, who's in the room somewhere, really led the work in the team to get that done. Please give Catherine a round of applause for all of her work. So for the past half century, the policy of tribal self-determination has been an unqualified success. And we worked closely with all of you to finalize these regulations. And included in these new Progress Act regulations is a requirement for greater transparency and consultation on matters related to self-governance and setting a more favorable standard for tribal management of investments. And the regulations apply to tribal programs operated by the BIA and other bureaus here at the Department of the Interior. So I know you're not all here to hear from me. We've got an incredible panel of really, really smart, hardworking people, and I'm going to introduce them to you right now, starting with, Secretary Vilsack, my favorite cabinet secretary, Secretary Deb Haaland, who needs no introduction to all of you. Of course, also Secretary Vilsack needs no introduction to all of you, having served now 3 full terms as Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary Vilsack has led the way in expanding co-stewardship opportunities and protecting sacred sites and cultural resources. Also introducing the Chair of the Council of Environmental Quality, Brenda Mallory. Yes. Chair Mallory has been one of the fiercest advocates for Indian country in terms of responding to climate change and protecting our air and water and lands. And we also have Chief Hoskin from Cherokee Nation, who's one of the fiercest leaders in Indian country as well. And Chief Hoskin, I'm glad to be here with you today. And also Chairwoman Erica Pinto from Hamul, who's helped co-chair the Secretary's Advisory Committee on Indian Affairs here at the department, and just an amazing partner for all that we're doing. That's right. All right. So our first question is for you, Chief Hoskin. Could you comment on some of the most successful or impactful ways the Biden-Harris administration has reinforced or elevated the nation-to-nation relationship?
Well, thank you for having me on the panel, and it's great to be with all the tribal leaders here. I think it starts fundamentally, and this is true of any administration, with who's appointed to these key positions. And as a tribal leader, what I saw were appointees who were qualified for the task, and there was no question about it, and in many cases came from Indian country. And whether they came from Indian country or not, we quickly saw from the tone and the substance that there was this level of care and concern about Indian country. I mean, you start with Secretary Holland, the only cabinet member that you could just mention her name in most tribal communities and there'd be a standing ovation, whether she's there or not. But as time would go by, we would see that it was more than words, it was deeds. But qualified appointees, number one. And not just in the executive branch. I mean, President Biden, Vice President Harris appointed more natives to the bench than any administration. That is something that's going to live on far beyond their time in office. That included people like my former Attorney General, Sarah Hill, who's in the Northern District. And there's many other examples. And then the real thoughtful engagement on tribal consultation. I mean, I serve with Chairwoman Pinto on the committee, the HHS committee, and there's many of those committees. It does command a great deal of time and attention of all of us, but that's the world we want to live in which people in agency leadership are going to the tribes and talking about policy, not imposing policy from on high, and we saw that. And then we would see the real product of all of that, the leadership, the engagement, and then the policy and the resources. And examples abound, but I'm telling you, from Cherokee Nation's perspective, generational impact in terms of resources that came down for things like infrastructure and health care, in a way that let tribes determine how best to spend those dollars, whether it was American Rescue Plan Act funds, bipartisan infrastructure bill funds, Inflation Reduction Act funds. Those reflected a respect for tribes that needs to be built upon, and I hope we don't see an erosion of it. So many examples. I will conclude, but if I could take a federal official who wants to know how she can make a difference in Indian country to one spot within Cherokee Nation, I'd take them to Kenwood, where we used American Rescue Act planned funds to build a cell tower. There wasn't a cell tower there before. We built a community building that replaced a Head Start, a place for elders to get a good meal and to socialize, a gymnasium, a ball field. If you're a kid in Kenwood, a Cherokee kid in Kenwood, you start to think the best days of your community are ahead, not behind, and that you may have a place there. And then across the street, we're expanding our language revitalization program. That's what we need in Indian country, and that's what we got through this administration. I saw it. There's many more examples. The access to capital that the Vice President was talking about, we're in the midst of a 10-year, $86 million loan program from the Treasury Department. I just got an email saying there was a $100,000 loan to a Cherokee entrepreneur. That's what we need, and that's what we got.
Thank you, Chief. Secretary Holland, by all metrics, this has been the most supportive administration in history for tribes and Native communities. From your perspective, what have been some of the key policy initiatives that have supported our relationship with tribal nations?
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Newland. Yes, I am, everything I said in my remarks this morning, I am so honored and proud to serve, and so honored and proud to serve Indian country. It seemed like for decades and decades, you know, I was at home making my homemade signs and going to protests and making the phone calls and writing the letters and all of these things, right? It's everything that all of us have done for decades, and it seems like finally we're really getting somewhere. So I've been really proud to be your partner in everything that we've been able to accomplish under this really wonderful administration. So first of all, you mentioned STAC earlier, the Secretary's Tribal Advisory Committee. We started that here with a group of tribal leaders from each region who were very, very committed to their communities, but committed to the other tribes in their regions. And as Brian mentioned, Chairwoman Pinto was leadership on that committee. They met many times in earnest, really worked hard to give us a set of recommendations that we could use to move forward, to move Indian country forward. So there's nothing like having a seat at the table for folks who can actually make some decisions. So I was really honored that they would spend their time working to help us to do our work better. And so the Secretary's Tribal Advisory Committee was one of the best moves I think that we've made since I've been here. Another big policy thing that we did with respect to the Colorado River negotiations. So historically, there are 30 tribes who rely on the Colorado River, for their life, quite frankly, and they were never invited to the negotiation table. It didn't make sense to me that tribes didn't have a say in this important natural resource that they had relied on since time immemorial. And so we worked incredibly hard to make sure that tribes had a voice, that they could show up to the meetings, that they could speak openly with state leaders and other leaders, federal leaders here in our Bureau of Reclamation, to make their voices heard. And I think what that produced was really more open conversation, making sure that everybody had a voice, that they could shape the future of our country. I'll just mention one more. I mentioned this morning about the co-stewardship agreements. We've done those, close to 400 agreements over the last 4 years. I couldn't have done that without my colleagues in the administration. Secretary Vilsack is a person who has been incredibly strong, incredibly gracious with his time whenever we've worked to talk about these things. So, I know in so many instances our people were moved off of their ancestral homeland to make way for something, to make way for a national park, to make way for a wildlife refuge, to make way for a public land of one kind or another. We move off of our ancestral homelands. It doesn't mean that we aren't obligated to those same ancestral homelands forever, for our entire lives. And so I've seen that. I've seen tribal co-stewardship in action when I have visited some of these areas, and quite frankly, I am incredibly grateful, and I will just say this to all of you. I'm so grateful that you are willing to share your knowledge with us, with the federal government, with the Department of the Interior, with my colleagues in the various bureaus and offices. It has really made an incredible difference, and I'm super grateful for the opportunities that you've given us to learn from all of you. So, we think about the future, right? None of us are here, and tribal leaders in the audience, you don't lead. You don't take your jobs because you care about what's happening now. Everything that you do is for the future. I recognize that, and I'm grateful that we have had opportunities to learn from you so that we can also think more about the future. It's all about the future generations. And so I think, if anything, here at Interior, we have 65,000 plus career staff and several hundred political appointees who have filled positions here and across the country. And all of us have benefited greatly from the opportunities that we have given ourselves to have more interaction with all of you. So I thank you so much for that, and I'm grateful for all of those things. If I have time, I'll mention one more thing: the Not Invisible Act Commission. That was a bill, the Not Invisible Act, that we were able to get past, my staff and I. And I'm looking at Heidi. All of you know Heidi. She was the lead on this, both in my congressional office and here. We passed that bill when I was in Congress, and then we got to implement it when I came over here. And so it was kind of an awesome thing to be able to follow that, right? You see bills pass, and sometimes you kind of say, what happened to that? We were able to implement that here, and Heidi and so many people from Indian Affairs worked incredibly hard to make sure that tribal voices, that the commission was assembled, and that we had opportunities to hear from folks in various places across the country about this really important issue of missing and murdered Indigenous people. So thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Secretary. Also, thank you for asking me for more time to talk to. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Secretary Vilsack, thank you for being here. Again, you've been just a wonderful advocate for Indian country throughout your career, and just personally, I'm very grateful for that. You know, I mentioned in introducing you, Secretary, about your work to safeguard lands and waters for Indian people. Could you comment for all of us on USDA's role in the Tribal Homelands Initiative and the success that the department's had with co-stewardship agreements, and from your perspective, why those are important?
Well, it's certainly an honor and privilege to be here today, and I feel honored to be on this panel. I think it's fair to say that any remarks that I make ought to begin with a very, very large thank you to Deb Haaland. I can tell you I've been in rooms with the President and Vice President where they spoke passionately about tribal issues, but no one has ever been in a room with Deb Haaland without hearing that passion. And that has made a fundamental difference in terms of how we at USDA approached our effort. She challenged us to always be thinking strategically on behalf of tribes and tribal nations. So I want to take this opportunity publicly to thank you. I've been blessed with our friendship. We've worked together at DOI and USDA. I would probably start with our joint secretarial order. It was an order that was really designed to better integrate tribes in the management of our public forested lands, focusing on the use and utilization of indigenous knowledge in land management. I think we've been pretty late to the game in doing that, but over the last 4 years we have accelerated the demand and desire to learn from those who have for centuries cared for these forests. And we've learned quite a bit. And as a result of that learning experience, and as a result of the tremendous assistance from Secretary Haaland, we made a real commitment to co-stewardship agreements of a variety of different kinds, demonstration project agreements, good neighbor agreements, special MOUs like the one in the Black Hills National Forest with 8 tribes of the Great Sioux Nation, things of that nature. All told, over 250 stewardship agreements of the 400 the Secretary mentioned. And in addition to the agreements, there were resources committed to those agreements. Of the $550 million that we have invested in Indian country in the last 4 years at USDA, 160 million of that was dedicated for those co-stewardship agreements. So extraordinarily important. But this would not be a Tribal Nation Summit without department heads coming with gifts, correct? That's the way it works, right? So we're announcing today an additional $20 million of Inflation Reduction Act resources that we're going to provide to tribes and Alaska Native corporations and villages. And this is resources that that is designed to provide assistance and help for those folks to basically access private markets. These private markets are going to be set up over time to essentially pay for climate benefits that can be generated by the way in which we use our lands and our forested areas, ways in which we can create greater resilience, ways in which we can mitigate the impacts of a changing climate, ways in which you all can commit to continued commitment to water quality and carbon sequestration. So this will generate opportunities for tribes to basically generate additional revenue based on their focus on climate smart practices. This includes a $3.6 million grant to the First Nation Development Initiative, all designed to provide resources to further the work that we've started over the last 4 years. NRCS, our conservation service, is also engaged in this effort, and we know that for far too long there have been barriers to some participation by tribes in some of our infrastructure programs, like the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, the Watershed Rehabilitation Program, where there were requirements that tribes had eminent domain power and authority. I'm pleased to note today that we are removing that barrier today, so that as a result, a number of tribes, over 30 tribes that have been unable to participate in these programs will now, by virtue of this change, be able to participate and obtain resources under these two important programs. We've also been engaged in the transfer of land. The Secretary Holland mentioned the importance of that. Nearly 15,000 acres of land that wasn't a Forest Service has now been transferred back to tribes, and we're very proud of that, and we want to see that obviously continue. And yeah, I've learned a lot in this experience, and I've learned that it takes far too long for those transfers to take place. And so we have underway a process which I hope to complete by January 20th that will shorten significantly the amount of time it takes to evaluate opportunities for transfers. So hopefully over the course of the future, you'll see more land transfers, you'll see quicker land transfers, because that's part of that nation-to-nation relationship that's so vitally important to maintain.
Thank you, Secretary. All right, Chairwoman Pinto, you're up. You're not only the elected chairwoman of your tribe, but you've also volunteered a difficult task by being one of the first co-chairs of the Secretary's Tribal Advisory Committee. Could you comment on the importance of STAC and what you see as the committee's role in the future?
Hello. Well, thank you for the question. And I do have to say as well, so honored to be on the stage and share with Chief, Madam Secretary, and the two below. I just feel so humbled. I feel so honored. And to have the first panel, the first stack, I cannot tell you how seeing all those tribal leaders around the stack, around the table, and hearing their issues that they brought to the table is so important, because there's 12 BIA regions, each having a primary and an alternate, and to see the issues that they raised at the stack level to various agencies who would come in and listen. And President Gravel, I don't know if she's here or not, but she is the chair, and her work and all the stack work, tremendous work. And like I said, the issues are different, but also the same. There are common denominators in each tribe that we hear everything. They're emotional. They have to do with, safety of our people. They have to do with the things that were just mentioned here, the co-stewardship of land, or climate change, or what have you. And so the important thing is for the people who come from their communities, be it California, Great Plains, the President Boo, I saw him in the audience, Navajo Nation. They come, share their issues, create policy, and Heidi's in the audience, and Heidi was pretty much a party of one until she got assistance, so she had a heavy lift for us being the initial stack. So it is important that we're there, seeing our faces, hearing our issues, taking them to a higher level, and hopefully making policies that will improve the lives of our people. Did you see that catch? It was a ninja catch. And so to be a part of that, it makes me feel so overwhelmed and overjoyed, because Madam Secretary is the first American Indian secretary to be appointed, and I applaud what President Biden has done for us. The most tribal-friendly policies, tribal-friendly things for tribes that he implemented in the last 4 years. What I see as the evolving future for STAC, I see that we're going to have to some way, somehow memorialize all these stacks. And if there's a handful of stacks that I know, the Department of Health and Human Services that Chief mentioned, and I see some Department of Health and Human Services stack members in the audience, those advisory committees must be memorialized. I know not all the agencies have them, but we need to get to a place where they do have them, because our tribal people are still here, and we will be here since the end of time, and I don't know when that is. But so that memorialized staffing, because we need help at these levels. You know, it shouldn't, when a change of administration comes, we shouldn't be worried or have uncertainty. So they need to be solidified so we can continue to hear the issues, because our issues will change, our issues will evolve over time. And I know there was a bunch of young people that were standing up during the Vice President's talk, and I want our young people to be empowered to join these stacks as we get older and pass the torch, that they will be there, you will be heard, the federal government will have their trust responsibility to the tribes and implement all these policies that we create as tribal people. And one thing I did forget to say when I am here and I'm looking at all of you in the audience, every time I come around and I'm around a bunch of tribal people, tribal leaders, in your regalia, look how beautiful you look. Because to me, when I look at all of you in the audience, I am blown away, because we have survived policies in the United States that were meant to eradicate us. And you should all be applauding yourselves for being here, for having the resilience, having the strength to survive and come here to where we are today. So that is the importance of the stack, and just be an honor to be part of it all. Thank you.
Language. Thank you, Chairwoman. I'm fired up listening to you.
And I want to apologize. I forgot the names of the two at the end of the table. I forgot their names, and I apologize.
I'll get back.
I'm young elder right now. Come on.
Also, that was an impressive ninja catch.
Did you see that?
Yes. Chair Mallory, thank you for being with us today. You've been, I think, at every Tribal Nation Summit and a steadfast partner from CEQ, which is right up there with OMB in terms of the most influential and important agencies that many Americans have never heard of or aren't familiar with. But it is true. I mean, you're at the center of everything government does. And in particular, the National Monument Designation process and other protections for our natural environment. So Chair Mallory, could you take a moment and comment on the importance of these designations for the country and on the importance of tribal co-stewardship and participation in that process?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you. It's always an honor to be here, and I, like everyone else, I'm just so honored to be on this panel with this group of folks who have already reflected both their great leadership and a wonderful partnership that we've had across the government. I think one of the things that is probably not thought of at the top of the list when people think about monument designations is how it is so integrated with our environmental protection and historic and cultural protection as well. And when you talk about tribes, to me, that becomes like the significance of that becomes even more important. And this president came into office with a kind of a theory, an approach to monument designations that really wanted to sort of center the way that we recognize communities, that we recognize the kind of sacred areas and sacred lands, and the importance of peoples who may not have been recognized previously through our designations or other actions. And so that has been front and center in what we've done. This president also came in with the idea that we really needed to make sure that our conservation activities were serving purposes that were not just for the aesthetic, but for the important role that we need to play in protecting our water, in protecting our lands, in ensuring that our forests are strong. All of these things are part of protecting those areas, as well as dealing with climate change and biodiversity. So those are issues that are all integrated into our work. And the president has, under that theory of the America the Beautiful, conserved 45 million acres of land so far in his time in office. And that is historic in the lower 48 for any first-term president. And so really proud of the scope of that. He started out immediately focused on some of the wrongs to tribes, because first acts in monument designations were restoring the scope of monuments that had been previously designated at Bears Ears, at Grand Staircase Escalante, and at the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts. That was the first acts towards monument protection. And then as we moved into his own monuments that were of significance, we had Avikwame in Nevada, we had the Grand Canyon ancestral footprints. We had, yes, these are good. We've had 2 monument designations in California recently at San Gabriel and Berryessa Snow Mountain, both of that also had traditional tribal interest in them. And then recently we did a national sanctuary designation that was originally proposed by indigenous folks at Chumash, and that was just recently done in the last month. And also all examples of where tribal communities, indigenous people were very much part of helping to push the administration to take the action to show why these places have been so important to the history and the culture of the people, and how they're still used today and have been used today, even if the tribes no longer had the land, as an important part of cultural actions and celebrations and ceremonies, and also that the importance of actually creating a role at these places for tribes to play as we move forward in management. And several of those reflect that, Chumash being an example of where we know that we're to do the management and do it well. And I think, as the Vice President said, to recognize that there is expertise all through the tribal communities that has kept areas of land in better condition than in some other areas. And so to be able to tap into that and to be able to use that as a way in which we think about how we continue to protect the lands, I think is really important. So just grateful for being able to show that part of the President's agenda.
Thank you, Chair Mallory, and thank you again for your commitment in making that happen. All right, Chief Hoskin, we're coming back around to you in the batting order. Tribal treaty rights are a vital part of the unique relationship between the United States and tribal nations. Can you comment on the importance of federal policy in protecting tribal treaty rights and how this administration has done in that area?
I can, Brian. I'm remiss, though, for not mentioning the progress that we've seen in Indian country under Secretary Vilsack. I just want to mention 2 things in the long list of resources that I cannot complete in this panel. The USDA is the reason we're able to stand up a program where we produce our own beef out of our processing plant and distribute it to elders. And that's because of the USDA's help. the USDA, as it turns out, has been important to language preservation. We've got a connectivity grant that's connecting rural communities to our language hub. So I wanted to thank the Secretary for that. As to treaty rights, and that's critical. And so I mentioned three things earlier: who the administration appointed, like yourself, in key positions, wonderful people who know what they're doing. The engagement, the type that we mentioned on STAC and other types of consultations and meetings. And then the resources flowing out of that and the policy. But treaty rights are fundamental. For different tribes, there are different treaties with different interests. I mean, I was reviewing tribes in the Great Lakes area, of course, are concerned about fishing rights, naturally. For us, the most important treaty right we've asserted has been our right to a delegate in the United States House of Representatives under our pre-Oklahoma statehood treaties. And we're still on that quest, but we got nothing but support from this administration. That's a congressional implementation, that particular treaty, but to have an administration that lifts up treaty rights sends a message to the country and to the Congress that treaties are the supreme law of the land, and they should be viewed that way, because they are. Treaties, though, can't just be supported in the abstract. And they've got to be supported in real terms. And here's an example that's come up in the last 5 years in the state of Oklahoma. The McGirt case, which people are familiar with, was the reaffirmation of the Muskogee Creek Nation reservation. It never went away. Very quickly, courts applied that case to the other 4 of the 5 large tribes in Oklahoma. This is where treaty rights, where the rubber hits the road. What that reaffirmation said was, these tribes, which were the exclusive tribal sovereigns before anyone ever heard of a state of Oklahoma, were viewed in the eyes of the United States and the state of Oklahoma by force of law as having that responsibility. So we take it very serious, as do the other 4 tribes, putting resources in. But the Justice Department, the Biden-Harris administration, working with the Congress, deployed resources so that we would not fail when all eyes were on us, when we needed resources to hire prosecutors and marshals and expand our courts to meet that moment. I mean, an administration that's indifferent or hostile to treaty rights doesn't have to abrogate a treaty right, which this administration's never done. They can just sit back and watch a train wreck caused by the United States. By the way, the tribes would have failed only because for 113 years the United States did the wrong thing. But this administration supported that effort because they knew what was at stake. Treaties are about rights and obligations. And one of the things that has impressed me so much with Secretary Haaland and her team is when the Cherokee Nation has looked at its obligations under our treaties, including in the Treaty of 1866, which obligated the Cherokee Nation, and does to this day, to recognize the rights of freedmen and their descendants. We got support, not just moral support, but support in real terms in that effort from this secretary and her team, because she and the Biden-Harris administration understand that treaties are a collection of rights and obligations. You don't get to pick and choose. You get all of them. And lastly, I'll say that as we're asserting these treaty rights and we've found support in this administration, every time we're successful, and that's why this delegate to Congress push is so important to me, we should think of it as vindicating one treaty right is an effort to vindicate all of them. And so we've got to all be in it together. But having an administration that sees the world that way has made this what I think is an effort of this century. It's going to be this century that we make the most strides on treaty rights. That tone, to the extent it's there in future administrations, will make all the difference in the world. And I've felt that this administration has supported us on treaty rights.
Thank you, Chief. As they taught us in law school, a treaty is not a grant of rights to Indian people. It's a grant of rights from Indian people. And we often talk about treaty rights as something that is exclusively belongs to tribes when, there are other parties to those treaties. And treaty rights are also the American government and the American people's rights as well. And so those agreements run both ways. And thank you for speaking to that. Secretary Haaland, As co-chair of the White House Council on Native Affairs, you've been able to work across the government to mobilize federal agencies to work together as one to support tribal nations and advance the trust responsibility. Can you comment on the importance of the Council's work?
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. And I'm really proud that President Biden restarted the White House Council on Native American Affairs. It's been important over these last 4 years that me and my colleagues gather to talk about the issues that affect Indian tribes. It's important that we all take to heart our collective obligations to tribes as employees of the federal government serving directly under a United States president. One of the things that I want to focus on is the work that we did on native languages. So that's been incredibly important to me. Some of you, you've heard me say this. I don't speak my native language fluently. It's Keres. I'm from New Mexico, and I see some of my Keres-speaking relatives in the audience today. I appreciate hearing the language when I can in this building, so thank you for that this morning. And I understand the language to a certain degree. My mother was afraid to teach us the language because she went to boarding school. She was also punished for speaking her native language at public school when she was in public school in Winslow, Arizona, where my grandparents were part of the assimilation policies of the United States. So I feel like we've made key progress on the work to restore native languages. You know, on the road to healing over a little over a year, that was the single most issue that was held in common with every visit that we made. People said, my language was not lost, it was stolen from me. And so that resonated at every single stop we had, that native languages were the most important thing that we could do. And so, you know, how do we show that it's important? We work to move the budget in a positive direction so that tribes have more funding to spend on their important native language efforts. And also, I just want to say that we have supported 100% on how tribes want to do this. We're not in your shoes. You know your communities. You know how important the native languages are to you and what's the best use of the funding that you get. So I also, and that being said, I had the honor of visiting the Cherokee Nation in their immersion school. I went along with the First Lady. By the way, President Biden and Dr. Biden are incredibly supportive of restoration of native languages, and I'm really grateful for their support through the years. I also want to say that we've partnered with the Department of Education and the Health and Human Services Department to develop a 10-year national plan, which you will hear more about soon. I want to acknowledge Tracy Goodluck for her hard work in working on that plan. Thank you, Tracy. You know, I get a lot, people say thank you to me all the time. I appreciate that, but I really know who does the amazing work that comes out of this department. It's my colleagues who I am proud and honored to serve alongside. So you can say thank you to all of my staff also, because they're the ones who are really putting in the work. So I just, you know, I'm really proud. I know there's Native educators here in the audience. I saw Kara Bobroff earlier. Those of you who have dedicated your careers to ensuring that our children have a culturally relevant education that sets them up for success in the future, and native languages are a part of this. Before I, and Chairwoman, I'm not a tribal leader, but I'm hogging the microphone myself. So my grandfather, you know, way back when, everyone had to learn each other's languages because that's how you communicated. In New Mexico, we have Tiwa, Tewa, Toa, and Keres, and different dialects of those languages. We had the Spanish who came to the state of New Mexico in the mid-1500s. Everybody had to learn each other's languages so that they could, and we also have the Navajo Nation in New Mexico as well. So my grandfather, he had friends all over the place. He spoke Spanish, he spoke some Navajo, he spoke Towa, which is his native language from Jemez Pueblo. He learned Keres because that was my grandmother's language. So you think if you had a child who could speak 4 languages, who was an artist, an athlete, could, you know, work to fix diesel trains, a diesel train mechanic, someone who knew all those things, that child, we would push them for a 4-year, 8-year college education to become a doctor or a lawyer or something that we felt would benefit our communities. Well, my grandfather worked on the railroad for 45 years. He didn't have those opportunities. And so I just, but yet he persevered in that area. He helped to start the Santa Fe Indian Band. They played in the inauguration of President Eisenhower in 1951. He started an all-Indian baseball team that won state championships in Arizona. If we want to lead in our communities, we find a way to do it. We don't wait for the federal government to grant us this or that. And so I am grateful for every single one of you who share a similar story, right? We're given a set of gifts that the Creator gives to us, and it's up to us to do something with those gifts. So I appreciate so much the opportunity to serve alongside you, and thank you for speaking my language in this building today.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Chair Mallory, I'm going to come back to you and note again that CEQ is a leader in the administration for supporting tribal leader decision-making and tribal consultation. Can you share some of the highlights of CEQ's work?
Sure. Thank you so much for that. And I guess I will start just with something that I often say, which is that the president and the vice president have really grounded our work in the environmental and climate and conservation space on the basic belief that every community, every person deserves access to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. And so all of the work that CEQ does is very much anchored in that approach. And one of the key areas in which we have sort of integrated the need to give attention to tribal communities and to the impacts of federal actions on tribal communities is through our National Environmental Policy Act, which is the statute that tells the federal government that they're supposed to look before they leap, that they're supposed to actually assess impacts of their activities before they undertake them. And this year, and actually for the entire 4 years, we have undertaken several different regulatory actions to really modernize and update the National Environmental Policy Act, including a final rule that we refer to as the Phase 2 rule, which actually kind of looked at and made changes across the regulatory approach that in particular was designed to make sure that communities who often feel the brunt of actions, federal actions, are part of the decision-making process, that they are consulted, that they have an opportunity to actually express how these things are going to impact them. And that is very much a place in which we have emphasized the importance of that connection with tribal communities, that we have emphasized the need to ensure that not only are we meeting our consultation requirements, which are separate and apart, but also that just in going through the review process that we are doing the outreach and engagement that's necessary. So that's number one. Number two, the Vice President used the word partnership when she spoke, and others have as well, and that is a place in which I think we have really leaned into the importance of trying to have relationships that go beyond sort of what I think people have maybe previously thought were the way in which the federal government is working with tribal communities. And one example for CEQ and for me in particular is the work that we have done in the Pacific Northwest, which is around trying to recreate kind of healthy and abundant salmon in the Pacific Northwest, and working with a number of tribes and leaders in that area who have been very focused on returning salmon to rivers that no longer had their presence. And so that's a place where the way that worked, because we were, constantly, really 2 decades being sued by environmental plaintiffs and tribes who basically saw us as violating the Endangered Species Act, and whenever actually reached to a court, we lost, the federal government. And so there was a sense that maybe we needed a new approach, and the new approach that we advanced in this administration was sort of this idea of a 10-year partnership where for 10 years we are working together not only to address that healthy and abundant salmon goal, but also to do it in ways that allow for the creation of energy that is sustainable, to do it recognizing that we have many other uses and needs in the Pacific Northwest that relate to our rivers and how they're used now, and that we have to be thinking about how do you meet those needs at the same time that you are protecting the resources. So that is an area in which I think we at CEQ at least have been very focused on trying to build the relationships that were necessary to make that successful. And the Pacific Northwest tribes have been really outstanding partners in that area.
Thank you, Chair Mallory. Secretary Vilsack, how has USDA supported food sovereignty for tribes, and what more needs to be done?
I appreciate that question. I've been struck by the comments that the Vice President made and then the panel has made in terms of the significance and comprehensive nature of the work that this administration has done. The Vice President spent some time talking about health care, language, environment, opportunity, employment, and economic development. Equally important, and as important, is food, the ability to access culturally appropriate foods. And for far too long, we've not done a very good job of making sure that we incorporated in the programs serving Native children that we gave them the opportunity to enjoy foods that are culturally appropriate, foods that are connected to the history of their people. We began the process of changing that with a food sovereignty initiative. And one of the first things we did was to create what we refer to as the local food purchasing agreement capacity, providing tribes with the resources to be able to actually create market opportunities for bison, for example, for other species that would be appropriate, a lot of seafood, obviously, as well. So we provided $120 million under this local food purchasing agreement process that would allow tribes to make their own decisions about whether they would use typical market opportunities or that they would address community feeding needs through these resources. And I can tell you that we're not done. We have until January 20th, and I anticipate there's going to be another round of funding for that local food purchasing agreement, and so tribes can expect and anticipate additional resources to do that. We also tried to incorporate more of these activities in the traditional programs at USDA. We obviously have feeding that takes place in school meals, and so we gave permission to schools across the United States to begin to incorporate more choice, more culturally sensitive and appropriate foods. and provide them the flexibility to utilize the resources that we make available for that purpose. We also looked at our Women, Infant, and Children program, the WIC program, and again expanded access and created greater flexibility within that program so that children under the age of 6 would also have an introduction into those culturally appropriate foods. Really proud of the work that Cherokee Nation and Chickasaw Nation have done in incorporating and embracing our summer feeding program, the Sunbucks program. This was a program that was the first significant nutrition assistance program developed by the federal government in over 45 years. And these two tribes in particular took advantage of this program. Over 250,000 children and their families are benefiting from the additional resource being made available under this program. And so it's incredibly important that we continue to support and to develop market opportunities, the processing and the production of these culturally sensitive foods. So in that vein, I want to make another announcement here today.
Another one?
Yes, because that's what Secretary Holland told me I was supposed to do. I think she told me that. You know, we set up a series of regional food business centers, 12 of them, and one of them was dedicated specifically to tribal needs. And we've essentially empowered with resources for these entities to go out and provide the technical assistance and the financial assistance that would enable areas to create healthier local and regional food systems, which obviously for tribes would involve the processing and development of culturally sensitive and appropriate foods. So today we're announcing the availability of $25 million through the National Intertribal Food Business Center. That's the center that's designated for tribal needs, to be able to support small and mid-sized farming operations, to be able to support small businesses that will allow us to create a supply chain for culturally sensitive foods. And I think it's important to note that over the course of the next several years, there'll be several rounds of funding being made available across the country to tribal areas and to tribes for this purpose. We're also awarding almost $1.3 million in awards to a number of tribal colleges. We understand they too have a specific and important role in all of this, to the extent that they can provide an understanding, a better appreciation, and for how to develop access to healthy, safe, indigenous food sources. Tribal colleges play a significant role, and they also create potentially the generation of young people who will be the owners of those processing facilities, the chefs that will figure out how to incorporate more indigenous foods into these school programs, into WIC and so forth. So about $1.3 million being made available today in awards to a number of tribal colleges. This will be the last time I have the opportunity to speak to a summit of this nature, and I've had the opportunity and privilege to be here both in the Obama administration and in the Biden-Harris administration. Let me first of all echo Secretary Holland's thank you for the tremendous and extraordinary work you all have done in educating the rest of us about the importance of the work that we collaboratively can do to build out opportunity in Indian country. But let me also challenge you. Much of what we've talked about were based on choices that were made by an administration that understood the responsibility and the duty to make these choices. It's now up to you to make sure that those choices are protected, enhanced, and expanded. We can't afford to have taken 2 steps forward and then a step back. So the challenge I put forward to you is to ensure that these young people the Vice President acknowledged earlier today actually do grow up in a nation that does a better job of recognizing the nation-to-nation responsibilities, does a better job of making sure our treaty responsibilities are honored, does a better job of figuring out how to learn from indigenous knowledge and incorporate that in the care of our natural resources, and does a better job of making sure that we work in partnership and collaboration. That's the challenge I leave with you today.
Thank you, Secretary Vilsack. Do you have another one of them announcements back there? You're coming in like DJ Khaled here. Another one. All right. That's awesome. Chair Pinto, you've been a powerful and forceful advocate on addressing MMIP issues. And as you know, the President and the Secretary have made that, addressing that issue, two of our biggest priorities here in the administration. Can you comment on your work with the administration on these issues?
Hello. You know, it was a group effort, I would say, and I can speak to this at the stack level. As I mentioned, MMIP is one of the topics that I kind of referenced earlier about we all have individual different topics, but MMIP is one of the ones that we all see in our communities. We advocated, many of us, pretty much all 12 delegates, primaries from each region, discussed, and some in great detail, the need for more law enforcement, more funding, parity amongst tribal police. You know, we went on, and we showed up and we advocated at that level. May I stray and talk a little bit about what the California tribes have done? Because this is where I brought my voice from. Some tribes in Southern California have collaborated for funding, for training and education of not only the public, but our young people on the dangers and the threats that we face as American Indian people. Forgive me for not knowing the stats right now, but I know, and my nieces know who are young, know that they have a higher chance of being murdered, of being sexually assaulted, of being kidnapped, of trafficked. They are aware. We applied for funding in Southern California. I know I see Chairwoman Dutschke, she's applied for funding from the state of California, handful of us in Southern California. There was millions of dollars handed out to the tribes, funded to the tribes, so we could address this very real epidemic. And for us, and the young people again, I want to speak to the young people again. We are going to spend the rest of our lives as American Indian people educating the public, breaking cycles, breaking stereotypes. And so with these fundings, we have employees, we have tribal people, we have members, citizens, elders. We are taking the money and doing a campaign. We're doing a summit that brings together not only the public, but multiple tribal nations in California to educate us, to prevent us. And I remember my first couple of days on the stack, first couple of meetings, and talking about MMIP and talking about this and being challenged to reach further and figure out what are the root causes of MMIP. And a lot of that has been addressed today on the stage from the panel. It's access to food, it's access to healthcare, it's poverty, it's access to capital, it's being taught the truth in your schools. It's healing, it's historical trauma, all of these things. And it was actually you, Assistant Secretary, you challenged me. You said, what's the root cause? So the last few years I've spent as a staff person, I've attended consultations, you submit comments. So just show up and participate and listen. I am a good listener. I have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so I'm really good at listening and hearing the issues. But we have to make sure that not only our youth, but our public, our elected officials are educated and know that all of these things that I just mentioned, having no revenue generated, having no access to, all of those things, no access to healthcare, those contribute to MMIP. Fentanyl was a big issue in the United States on American Indian communities. The cartel infiltration, I heard that a lot. That is a contributor to MMIP, trafficking. So we've educated our employees. We're doing the education for our youth. They know, they participate in rallies in the state of Sacramento. So they're to themselves carrying the torch now, and they know that they have to be safe. They have to watch themselves. They have to watch each other. We are establishing our tribal police department. We're just doing everything that we can to keep our people safe down in California. And I applaud what the administration has done. I applaud the task force that was created here at the national level. In California, we are putting a tribal police officer in the state task force, which is a win for all of California. We just heard this, in the last 2 weeks, something that we've tried for a long time. It's done and it's accomplished. And we will always continue to work towards MMIP in resolving this. And I hope to one day that this will be something of the past. Just like I hope healthcare will be obsolete for us and we won't need that because we will have access to these foods that Secretary Vilsack mentioned. It's just a continuing education. It's a continuing work that we all are going to do. And I applaud the young people too, because you're going to have to carry this torch and do the same thing because of that revolving door of our doctors, of our police. And so I just always carry it in my heart and show up and I listen and I speak, because I didn't always have my voice as a sufferer from this childhood trauma, and then when I got sober, it's a big deal and I see it, and we can all choose different paths, but if we work together, I think this is something that we can tackle eventually. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Pinto. We have just a few moments left. I want to take a moment of privilege and thank all of you tribal leaders and representatives here today for our partnership in working together. You've heard already a little bit on this panel, a lot of reference to places we've all visited and people we've worked with by first name. I think that reflects the relationships that we've built with one another and the coordination with each other that has gone on here, and that's the way that this should be. And so I want to thank you, all of you, for doing what you do and your partnership here. And so I'm out of cards, but I want to take the moment, just a moment, and briefly come down the line here, starting with you, Chair Mallory, and maybe just any final reflections on your work with tribal leaders and things that stand out to you in your experience here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's really been an honor, and I have learned so much. I was meeting with folks from Yakima this morning, and what I said to them is what has been so true, that my very first meeting, I was inspired and challenged by them to be the warrior for these efforts and for the work that we're doing. And I took that seriously. And I think in the whole 4 years, I've really learned so much from every community that I've met about not only the conditions that people are dealing with, but more importantly, the soul that folks bring to all of these issues that changes the way you look at how we need to tackle these problems. So I'm grateful. I appreciate the coordination, and I know that it's so much what the President and the Vice President have really wanted us to achieve in this year.
Thank you.
4 years.
Secretary Vilsack?
I've just always been impressed with the passion and the persistence of tribal leaders. The leaders that I've had a chance to visit with have been incredibly articulate in terms of educating me and our team at USDA about the needs and challenges that we have in Indian country. Been very fortunate to have some very strong folks in the tribal relations. Heather Don Thompson did a great job for us. And my sincere hope that future administrations understand the significance and importance of having a tribal relations director in the Secretary's office, not someplace in the building, but literally directly reporting to the Secretary, because nothing is more effective of making sure that tribal needs and tribal concerns are front and center than having somebody who can directly communicate that to the Secretary. So that would be my hope.
Thank you, Secretary. Secretary Holland?
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Newland. Gosh, it's hard to say. Of course, this is, as I mentioned in my remarks this morning, this has been the honor of my lifetime to serve in this position, and certainly for a president who has seen and heard Indian country like no president that I have ever experienced in my lifetime. So I want to just give a tremendous thank you to President Biden, who has really been a champion for Indian country. I want you all to know that he has cared deeply about every single one of you. And I'm just so appreciative that all of you, as I mentioned earlier, are always willing to share your knowledge and your experience with federal employees like myself. All the visits that I've made to Indian country, you have sang for me, you have danced for me, you have cooked for me, you have welcomed us always into your communities, and that warmth is something that I will never forget. I am just so grateful for all the opportunities I've had to visit with all of you in your home communities, and I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for your hospitality, your kindness, your graciousness, and for the knowledge that you have shared with all of us. And I'm not going to be long in this position, till sometime next month. But I want you to know that I'm always going to be somewhere where perhaps I can help or, talk with you about something that, in a way that might help move Indian country forward. It's incredibly important. Our youth are our most valued asset that we have. And so I hope that, that for their sake, all of you keep moving forward. Keep your voices loud and heard. Make sure that you are acting on behalf of your communities just like you always have. It will be more important than ever to make sure that we continue to move forward.
Miigwech. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Misawe, we're out of time. Please give it up for our panelists. Thank you so much. Thank all of you.
Okay. People are starting to move, so. To implement President Biden's memorandum on uniform standards for tribal consultation, the White House Council on Native American Affairs, in partnership with the Department of the Interior, Office of Management and Budget, and the Office of Personnel Management, are rolling out 2 new trainings for all federal employees who work with or on policies that impact tribes on tribal consultation and tribal treaty and reserved rights. This will not be just training. It's an exciting opportunity to be part of a significant shift towards respect and acknowledgement of Indigenous rights. Please enjoy a trailer video of the trainings.
And we hope that the United States recognizes that its obligation is also bound in the soil of this United States. The things that we treated for, the things that we promised, those were not cessions by defeated peoples. Those were guarantees between two governments.
Welcome to Understanding Tribal Treaties and Reserved Rights. Let's start with the basics. What exactly are treaties, and where do they fit within the federal government structure? Treaties are legally binding formal agreements between two or more sovereign nations.
This course aims to provide federal employees with foundational knowledge so as to strengthen the nation-to-nation relationship that exists between the federal government and tribal nations. Your takeaway for this episode is that a tribe's sovereign status predates the Constitution.
Throughout this course, you will have the chance to hear directly from tribal leaders. We are grateful to these tribal leaders for sharing their own and their tribe's experiences and views so that you, as federal employees, are better able to understand tribal perspectives when working on matters that intersect with tribal interests.
We have a government-to-government relationship with the United States with the trust and treaty obligation that they have to us because we paid it forward with our lands, the lives of our ancestors, and our natural resources. However, the United States doesn't always feel that way. Most federal agencies think it's only the Department of the Interior's responsibility to work with tribes, but it's not. It's every federal agency, entity, and administration.
Tribal sovereignty is a term you've probably heard, but what does it really mean? While there are many aspects to this concept, simply put, it refers to the political and legal authority of tribal nations to govern themselves and make their own laws. Why is it important for federal employees to understand tribal sovereignty? Because having a better understanding of tribal sovereignty will improve how you interact with and serve tribes and is key for meaningful and effective collaboration between the United States and tribal nations.
So, what exactly are reserved rights, and why do they matter? Reserved rights can include implied rights that were retained by or reserved for tribes. The key word to remember here is implied.
I wish federal employees, before meeting with the tribes, understood the treaties of the tribe and the difference in the treaties between tribes, especially if there's, opposition or concerns from other tribes, and you need to really understand the full history of those treaties and what those treaty rights were.
In today's episode, Treaties and Reserved Rights in Action Today, we'll discuss how treaties are interpreted and implemented in the modern context.
Welcome to Introduction to Tribal Consultations. By taking this course, you've started on a path to engage in effective and respectful tribal consultation with sovereign tribal nations. The purpose of this course is to provide a general overview of what tribal consultation is, why it's important, and the best practices for planning, preparing, conducting, and closing out a tribal consultation.
What is tribal consultation? In this module, we will define some key terms and discuss why tribal consultations are important. By the end of this module, you will be able to explain the concept of tribal consultation and its importance in the nation-to-nation relationship between the federal government and tribal nations.
The main takeaway from this module is that consultation is a mutually agreed upon formal process for decision-making between tribal nations and the federal government that respects the sovereign status of tribal nations and ensures their voices are considered in federal policymaking and actions, promoting collaboration and mutual respect. If you work with tribal nations or on policies with potential tribal implications, it is critical that you understand the importance of consultation and its role in the federal decision-making process.
Federal administrations change, and so the hard part is it's always a tough educational process because you have many states in the United States that are represented by Congress or Senate. They don't have tribes in their states. And so, again, it's a continual process trying to make sure that they're aware of our history, they're aware of our needs, and they're aware of the promises that this federal government made, years ago around some of these big issues that we need to take care of our people.
These are the executive policies currently in place to provide direction and guidance to agencies. Presidential Executive Order 13175, Consultation and Coordination with Indian Tribal Governments, was issued November 6, 2000.
So I think some key steps as it relates to tribal consultation for federal employees is to not go into the consultation with a predetermined decision already made. I have been part of many conversations with federal employees that have been labeled as consultation, where a decision was being made, had been made already, and the consultation was just to check a box that needed to be checked.
By the end of this module, you will be able to identify and describe best practices for planning, preparing, conducting, and closing out tribal consultations. Your agency's tribal consultation policy should have a defined process for initiating a tribal consultation, but here are some best practices to follow.
Well, there's one example where you really can frustrate a tribe if you provide information to another government, like a state or local government, and not share it with the tribe.
Each agency must designate a primary point of contact to advise agency staff on tribal consultation matters. The agency can designate additional points of contact or a specific office is needed.
You work for the United States government, meaningful engage these consultation processes, do right by your own moral code, do right by the law, and then do right by tribes and do right by the United States. Be part of expressing, through your work, the best of the United States, the best of America.
We strongly encourage everyone to remain in your seats. From this point forward, if you depart the auditorium, you may not be able to get back in.
Music down. BOG live.
Now, welcome to the stage dancers who are federal employees from across Indian Affairs bureaus and regions. The dancers featured today are men's Northern, Southern traditional, women's Northern, Southern traditional, women's fancy, and women's jingle.
Wow. So check 1, 2. This is for the mults. For the mults. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Hey, I am checking for the mults. Barton, can you verify that you are getting me to the mults from the lectern? Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, you got a thumbs up. I did get a thumbs up from my camera operator, so the mults should have me right now.
Okay, let's start with the teleprompters in the downward position. I feel good. You feel good? Yep. Okay. You feel good. Thanks, everybody. Nice big person. Secretary. Yes, let's pull up the box. Yeah, we're at 31-foot candles. Lights are set. We're going to start with the paddles in the downward position so we can get a clear shot of the blanket. Crescent blanket breaks up with the paddles back up. It's like a 16-second transition. Other than that, we look good. This is how, because Secretary she's going straight. She has just her.
Please welcome Secretary of the Interior, Deb.
Hello again. I promise I'm almost done with my remarks. Thanks for bearing with me. So hello again, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed today's discussions and that really amazing lunch that we had. 20 years ago, I would never have believed that I would be standing here addressing you as the Secretary of the Interior, talking about, thank you. Thank you. Talking about the historic progress we have made for Indian country. President Biden has been the best president for Indian country in my lifetime. This is a president and an administration that truly sees Indigenous people and has worked tirelessly to address the issues in Indian country that have long been underfunded or outright ignored. From infrastructure to education to the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, President Joe Biden has directed historic resources into the hands of tribal leaders who know best how to strengthen their communities. Across the Investing in America agenda, a historic $45 billion, more than 15 years' worth of the Bureau of Indian Affairs annual budget has gone into Indian country through this administration. With that comes enduring and transformational change. It means electrifying homes on the Hopi Reservation in Arizona that have never had it, protecting cultural resources like salmon, which Pacific Northwest tribes have stewarded for thousands of years, building new transportation infrastructure for the Mescalero Apache Nation in New Mexico that will provide a safer travel route and boost the tribe's local economy, addressing toxic legacy pollution and abandoned oil and gas infrastructure that pollutes air and water for the Osage Nation in Oklahoma, and providing clean drinking water for Fort Peck in Montana. I could go on. This is a once-in-a-generation funding that is empowering tribes and making up for significant and systemic underfunding of tribal communities. Of course, we know that the need in our communities is still incredibly high. We know that many priorities still need adequate funding and resources. That's what decades of lack of investments look like. But what we have done will have lasting and enduring results for the generations that have counted on us to show up. It means that our kids and grandkids have a better shot at living lives where their needs are met, where their futures are bright, and where the pains and ills of the past no longer dictate who they can become. That progress is on us, and it's thanks to President Biden for making this administration and our cabinet firm and unwavering partners in Indian country. Now, like any good tribal council, our cabinet has not always been unified in every decision. We're passionate people, united in service to the American people, but also unique in our perspectives. But every single day, I have felt heard, I have felt respected, and I have felt secure that my advocacy on behalf of Indian country has been acknowledged and seen by the White House. 20 years ago, I would never have thought I'd be standing here. I would never have thought I'd be welcoming the President of the United States to come on stage and greet my relatives, friends, and colleagues from across the nation. Yet here we are. So please give a warm welcome to someone I am so honored to call our friend, President Joe Biden. before the president gives his remarks, Assistant Secretary Newland and I wanted to acknowledge the wonderful leadership by President Biden. He has been a champion for Indian country over these past 4 years, and I felt the best way for us to acknowledge that was with a blanket. This is an 8th generation blanket from a tribally owned business, and I've had it embroidered. Assistant Secretary. It says Joe Biden, champion for Indian country, 2021 to 2024. I think they want us to look over there where all the... Yes, but let's take this off. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Big wish.
I could have used that blanket when I was lighting that Christmas tree. Both of us were freezing, the Secretary. Thank you, Secretary Holland. Assistant Secretary Newland. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, it's the honor of my life to be a partner of the tribes throughout my presidency. I'm going to cherish this moment. You know, I was raised by a guy politically when I got here as a 29-year-old kid as a senator. I was raised by a guy named Danny Inouye. And I once used the phrase, tribe said, no, Joe, nations, nations. I want to thank Secretary Howland for the introduction and for your historic leadership of the Department of Interior. And this has been historic. It's been historic. I've worked with a lot of cabinet secretaries. I've appointed a bunch over my 500-year career. But I tell you what, I've never met with a cabinet secretary more devoted to their obligation, the job she's taken on. I really mean it. And thanks to all the tribal leaders who traveled across the country representing your tribal nations. Folks, I came to office and I relaunched the White House Tribal Nations Summit to bring us all together again. Talk about the needs of your communities, to set goals, to listen. Because I recognize that respect is the core of nation-to-nation relationships. We have a lot to be proud of, I think. We've gotten a lot done. From day one, my administration, we've worked to include indigenous voices in everything we do. Not only the first Native American cabinet secretary in history, more than 80 Native Americans now serve in senior roles across my administration. I mean this sincerely. With their help, we've shaped our approach to Indian country with respect and matched our words with action. I'm proud to have reestablished the White House Council on Native American Affairs and taken historic steps to improve tribal consultation. For example, you shared with me that too many federal programs treat tribes like they're subsidiaries of the government, like cities or counties, rather than tribal nations. Nations, not subsidiaries. That's who you are, you're nations. So, at last year's summit, I signed a groundbreaking executive order to recognize that you should be treated as tribal nations with respect to your decision-making power. That executive order requires federal agencies to streamline grant applications, to co-manage federal programs, to eliminate heavy-handed reporting requirements. Trying to do that across the board, by the way. We're also investing in a historic $45 billion directly into Indian country. More is needed, but it's more than ever happened before. This includes helping tribal communities get through the pandemic with vaccines and arms and checks in pockets. We're helping tribes build new roads, bridges, deliver affordable, high-speed internet, and clean water across tribal communities. As a nation, we're making the biggest investment ever in fighting climate change, ever, anywhere in the history of the world. which helps tribal communities to lead in transition to clean energy and ease the impact of droughts and wildfires and rising sea levels that threaten native lives and precious homelands. I secured the first ever advanced funding for the Indian Health Service. Where I come from, we call that a big deal. Indian Health Service, the tribal hospitals can plan ahead, order supplies, hire doctors, knowing the money will be there, not having to wonder. All told, in 4 years, we've created 200,000 jobs for Native Americans. A record low unemployment for Native communities. There's been an historic $8 billion increase in federal contracts awarded to Native businesses. And I'm proud, that's important, I think. I'm proud to have helped cut child poverty in tribal communities by more than 1/3 and more to do. The folks, at the same time, we're also doing what we should have done a long time ago, preserving ancestral tribal homelands. It really is important. It really is important. One example is restoring salmon fishing, which historically has been very important to Native communities. You know, I think it's very important that we memorialize Native culture and history by restoring and designating multiple national monuments that honor tribal nations and protect their homelands. From Bears Ears to Spirit Mountain, which comprise nearly 2 million acres combined, will be preserved in perpetuity forever, ever, ever. I remember a young woman came up to me, a young girl came to me and said, I bent down, she said, "Can I talk to you?" I said, "Sure." She said, "Can you take care of Bear's Ears?" I said, "I beg your pardon? Can you take care of Bear's Ears?" I thought she wanted me to capture a bear, you know. And when we signed the bill, I gave her the pen. Look, it's sacred, it's magnificent. And this year, my administration designated the first native marine sanctuary proposed by indigenous communities, which is off the coast of California, which occupies 4,500 square miles. That's off limits. You know, these efforts are totally consistent with my commitment when I came to office to preserve 30% of all America's lands and waters permanently by the year 2030. And we're well on our way because of the help you've given me. And we're doing all this with respect for the stewardship practices that tribes developed over the centuries, known as indigenous knowledge. I believe tribes should have a say in how these sacred lands are managed. To this day, they should have a say. And last year alone, we doubled the number of co-stewardship agreements, totaling 400 with tribal nations. All this is a stark cry from the failed policies of the past. In October, I saw many of you in Arizona. It's a day I'll never forget. On behalf of the American people, I felt it was really important for a President of the United States to stand up and right a wrong that had been ignored for a long time, and apologize for the We're not about erasing history, we're about recognizing history, the good, bad, and the ugly. I apologize for the federal Indian boarding school era, a dark chapter that spanned 150 years from the 1960, in which entire generations of Native children were literally stolen from their families and tribes and sent away to boarding school. The official policy in the federal government designed to sever ties between children and their tribal families, their language, and their culture. Today, we act to continue that healing process. I'm proud to announce we're establishing the historic Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania as a new national monument. So I want everyone to know. I don't want people forgetting 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now, pretend it didn't happen. The Carlisle Indian School was the first off-reservation federal Indian boarding school for Native children that were taken to, the first one. About 7,800 children from more than 140 tribes were sent to Carlisle, stolen from their families, their tribes, and their homelands. It was wrong. In making the Carlisle Indian School a national monument, we make clear that what great nations do. We don't erase history, we acknowledge it, we learn from it, and we remember so we never repeat it again. We remember so we can heal. That's the purpose of memory. Now, part of the tragedy of Indian boarding schools is that they deliberately tried to erase the culture of tribes by ensuring that children lost their language and their traditions. That's why the next chapter of healing requires revitalizing native languages. My wife, Jill, to her, this is something our First Lady cares deeply about. She's an educator. In her first trip with Secretary Holland, she visited the language immersion program of the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. Jill saw Native children light up, as they said at words their ancestors once spoke. Over 3/4 of the remaining native languages are in danger of being lost forever. That's why today my administration is moving ahead on a 10-year plan to revive native languages in a serious effort. It's a vision that works with tribes and support teachers, schools, communities, organizations in order to save native language from disappearing. This matters. It's part of our heritage. It's part of who we are as a nation. It's how we got to be who we are. We also heard loud and clear that public safety is a top concern of Native communities. That's why when I was a vice president, when we reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act, which is my daughter says I wrote with my own paw. I wrote it 30 years ago, one of the proudest things I ever did. We also reaffirmed tribal sovereignty and expanded tribal jurisdiction to cover cases where outside predators harm members of Indian nations in Indian country and decided there. I also signed an executive order to improve public safety and criminal justice to address the crisis of missing or murdered Indigenous people. These efforts, and all of our efforts, are a matter of restoring dignity that was taken away from tribal nations. Dignity. My dad used to say, Joey, and I mean sincerely, everyone is entitled to be treated with dignity. A word most often used in my family by my dad. Dignity. That's the foundation of our nation-to-nation partnership. Let me close with this. This is my final White House Tribal Nation Summit as your president. It's been an overwhelming honor, and I mean it sincerely, an honor of a lifetime to usher in a new era of tribal sovereignty and self-determination. A new era grounded in dignity and respect that I've seen and experienced in many ways. In October, I had the honor to bestow one of our nation's highest medals, the National Medal of Humanities, on Joy Harjo, the first Native American to serve this nation as Poet Laureate. She once wrote, and I quote, "You are a story fed by generations. You carry songs of grief, triumph, and loss. Feel their power as they ascend with you, as you walk, run swiftly, even fly into infinite possibilities." End of quote. To all the tribal nations, I say thank you, and I mean it sincerely. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your trust in me. But most of all, thank you for your friendship. And always believing, as I do, that the possibilities of our nation are limitless. I was once asked when I spent more time with Xi Jinping of China than any other world leader has, over 108 hours alone with him. I was on the Tibetan Plateau with him in China. And I looked at me and said, "Can you define America for me?" And this is on the record. I said, "Yes, one word." He looked at me through a translator. I said, "Possibilities." In America, we believe anything is possible if we do it together. And that's what we've done. Damn it, we're going to continue doing it. Thank you. know, folks, I had a grandfather named Ambrose Finnegan, who was an All-American football player, and his parents came up with one of those coffin ships from Ireland. And every time I'd leave his house, he'd yell, "Joey, keep the faith." And my grandmother would, "No, Joey, spread it. Let's spread the faith."
Am I going to do it? Please welcome back to the stage Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland.
Okay, we're almost done, everyone. Yes, but it's really hard following the President of the United States. So hello again, everyone. As I mentioned this morning when I launched the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative in 2021, hi, everyone. I had no idea where it would lead us, and yet here I stand. We didn't expect that it would launch us on a journey to hear directly from Indian country about the horrors of the boarding school era. We didn't expect that our team would review over 103 million pages of documents to inform the first ever federal report on the trauma that our children endured for 150 years. We didn't expect the President of the United States to issue a formal apology for the atrocities committed through the assimilation policies of that boarding school era. And we certainly didn't expect that he would use his authority to designate a national monument dedicated to telling the full and honest story of this dark chapter of our nation's history. And yet, here I stand. I stand on my mother's shoulders. I stand on my grandmother's shoulders. I stand on your shoulders. None of this would have happened without all of you. Along the road to healing, we heard the same thing over and over. This is the first time, quote, "This is the first time I have spoken of what happened to me," end of quote. Friends, it is hard to overstate what this administration, what this journey, and what this president have meant for our shared healing, our co-stewardship, our tribally led conservation efforts, the opportunities through education, and the outdoors for our children. President Biden, thank you for bringing Indian country to the table. Thank you for making us a priority when so many administrations before ours have not. Thank you for being our friend. Everyone, let's please give one more round of applause for President Joe Biden. Thank you. Thank you so much. Before I close, I just want to remind all of you that your voice is important, and it will remain important even after the close of this administration. Everything that we have accomplished together had real positive effects for the people in your communities. And I wish for all of you to continue this journey forward, knowing that you have friends in the people here who dedicated the last 4 years to the progress that we achieved together. We might be in various places across the country, but we still are your friends and we still want to hear from you. Dawa. Thank you all so much for joining us for this year's Tribal Nation Summit. I wish you and your families a blessed holiday season and a very happy and prosperous new year. It has been the honor of my lifetime to be a part of history right alongside you. Now, we're going to take a photo outside because this morning it was raining and we didn't want it to be a wet photo. So we're going to take a photo outside, but before that, we're going to close out our day, and so you'll see how that closes out. And then following the photo, I will see you all at a reception in my office, and I'm really honored to have that opportunity as well. Thank you all so much again. Blessings to all of you, and appreciate everything that you've done for this summit. Thank you.
Would everyone please rise as you are able for the retiring of the colors and the closing drum song that will conclude the 2024 Tribal Nations Summit.
Say